Okay, for those of us just joining, thank you for attending the webinar. We are going to get started in 1 or 2 moments. We are just giving people a couple more seconds to log in. Thank you. Okay, I see a few more people coming in, so we are going to get started in 1 moment. For those of you that just joined, it's the first time you're hearing me say that. For those that have been on it, you're probably tired of hearing me say that by now, but we're going to get started in 1 more moment. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your afternoon to join us today for a webinar on ISO 27001. My name is Carla Higginbotham, and I'm with Pivot Point Security. And the reason that we wanted to host this webinar is we talk to clients day in and day out in regards to this topic. And a lot of the questions that they ask are uniform across all the different industries and verticals. So we wanted to host this to give everyone a general overview of what ISO 27001 looks like for your organization, what's involved in attaining the certification, how much does it cost, how hard is it to do, and what it looks like. So we have an expert on the phone, John Very, who is our managing partner and guru in the field, and he's going to be presenting today.
You forgot incredibly handsome. I thought I added that to the description.
So I was getting to that, John.
Oh.
So with that said, we're going to give it to John in just 1 moment. If you have questions during the webinar, we ask that you submit them using the application, and we will address them as they come through and at the end of the webinar. So with that said, I will now introduce the handsome and brilliantly smart John Very.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad we got that addressed. And of course, as we passed me, there you go. The advancing stopped. So Carla was nice enough actually to do my first slide for me. So the agenda was outlined in our presentation, the description of the webinar, and Carla did a nice job as well. So I'll just jump right into it. Move into a full screen mode might be best. Some of the slides are a little bit information rich, and that'll probably help a little bit. So fundamentally, what is ISO 27001? First and foremost, it's a standard, right? It's a basis for comparison. And it's a basis for comparison for effectively managing information security, and more specifically, the risk associated with information security. It's important to note that it's internationally recognized. ISO 27001 has been around since 2005 in practice. It was pre-existed that in a document called ISO 17799. And that was even pre-existed by a standard referred to as the British Security Standard, BS 7799, which stems all the way back to the 1990s. So this is a standard which has been around for quite a long time. It's gone through a number of important revisions. It is widely leveraged across the world up until about 2008, 2009. We didn't see that much of it here in the U.S., although I just noticed that the U.S. has passed. I think we're up to about third place now, behind, or fourth place, behind predominantly some of the UK and Japan. What's really critical to ISO is the fact that it's a certifiable standard. What that means is that an independent, objective third party, which has been accredited by what's referred to as an accreditation body, the two you might be familiar with would be UCAS and ANAB. This accreditation body verifies the capabilities and approach of an organization to conducting an audit to confirm conformance with the standard. They also do the same with the actual certified lead auditor who actually conducts the audit. Again, they validate his competency and his experience to be able to do this. I'm actually an ISO 27001 certified lead auditor. It's a much more robust practice than most. Despite the fact that I had been doing this for 15 years, I still had to actually conduct an audit in front of another ISO 27001 certified lead auditor who validated my competency. It's an information security management system. Now that's a phrase that rolls off my tongue really easily, but I do note that some of our customers don't quite understand exactly what that means, and I'll address that in a second. What's important about ISO 27001 as well is that it recognizes the fact that information security and information security risk is not just a CSO problem or CISO problem. It's a CEO and COO problem. So it does require that quote-unquote top management is actively engaged in managing information-related risk. So we talked about the idea of, an ISMS, right? And that flowed so easily off my tongue there. An ISMS is a cohesive, integrated set of processes, if you will, right? That allow us to understand and assess and verify that we are managing information-related risks in accordance with the business's risk appetite. You could look at it as saying, the way I know which controls that I need and how strong they need to be, right, is based on this risk management framework, based on this process. If you have a well-executed information security management system, you could look at this as if somebody asks you the question, why doesn't your business continuity plan address earthquakes? One answer might be because we didn't think of that. Another answer would be because we considered earthquakes, but because our company is located in New Jersey and the risk of an earthquake is sufficiently low, we chose not to include that in our business continuity plan, and I can show you where that was considered in our risk assessment. So if you implement an ISO 27001 ISMS, it gives you an ability to inherently document the decisions that you make and rationalize and be able to explain to another entity, right, why you've made the decisions you've made from an information security perspective, right? So why is it that your passwords are 8 characters? Is that because it's best practice? Best practice for who? Might not be best practice for you. Certainly best practice for the NSA or CIA is not the best practice for a widget manufacturer. So what's really neat about ISO 27001 is it gives you a rationalizable way to determine which controls you need and which are most appropriate for your particular organization. Now, that last slide covered the concept of an information security management system. So let's talk about an ISO 27001 specific information security management system. So what does that look like in practice? Well, the first thing we need to figure out when we're building an ISMS is, what are we trying to accomplish and why, right? Who are the key stakeholders? What are the objectives for the ISMS? What information are we protecting and how well are we protecting it? Once we've understood that, we need to understand what is it that top management needs to do to make sure that this ISMS is going to be effective? What is their role in governing it? We need to determine how we're going to repeatedly and consistently, right, understand and measure risk in a way that's going to allow us to know as an organization that we're reducing those risks to levels which we would deem acceptable. I mean, the reality is in any management system or any risk management system, there's no way to reduce risk to zero, short of cutting off the internet and closing our doors. So we're always going to have to accept a certain level of risk. It's just a matter of what risk is reasonable for us to accept. We need to ensure that once we've got the framework in place, once we've got management's commitment, once we know what our risks are and what our objectives are, how do we know that we've got the right people? How do we know that they're competent? Right? How do they know they have the information necessary to manage risk effectively for us? Right? How do we know that the people in our organization that we're reliant on to follow these controls and to help us manage this risk, our employees, or actually have the awareness that they require, the knowledge and training that they require to manage this risk effectively? Do they have access to timely, up-to-date, controlled information that they require to actually do this, right? People are our biggest threat surface. So security awareness, security education, making sure that they're somebody that helps us reduce risk rather than increase risk is a fantastic thing. You'll notice that after each of the bullets, you'll see clause 4, 5, 6, 7. If you grabbed a copy of ISO 27001, and if you're serious about looking at ISO 27001, I'd recommend you do. Unfortunately, you have to pay for it. It's about 140 bucks at this time. But ISO 27001, you're probably going to be surprised when you purchase it because you're probably thinking it's going to be a very large document. And it's actually not. It's probably a 20-page, 25-page document. And the meaningful content within it is actually only about 10 or 12 pages. And really, the meaningful content is clauses 4 through 10. And really what I've done here is simplified clause 4 to a single bullet, clause 5 to a single bullet. So it gives you an idea. This is really at a high level what the actual standard is telling you need to account for. We have these critical processes that we need to put in place to operationalize the ISMS, right? Most notably, right, it's a risk management framework. How do we consistently and effectively and at the right points in time ensure that risk is being properly considered as we migrate to a new data center, as we make a change to critical enterprise software that might influence information-related risk? How do we know we have the proper processes in place? And how do we ensure we control those processes to ensure that those risks are being considered at the right points in time? Once we have that set up, right, one of the key things is how does management ensure the effectiveness of the ISMS on a go-forward basis? Right, we've established the ISMS to protect risk to an acceptable level, to achieve our security objectives. How do we validate that that's actually happening? Right, typically in an ISO 27001 ISMS, that happens through something called security metrics, and that happens through something called an internal ISMS audit, as well as your certification audit. And then last, when things go wrong, and even with a perfect, well, there is no such thing as perfect, even with a very good ISO 27001 ISMS, things go wrong, right? And when they do go wrong, right, what do we do about that? What is the process that we follow to ensure that we learn from those challenges and we learn from those mistakes? Because one of the key parts of ISO is we also are required by the standard, if you become certified, you're required each year to demonstrate to the auditor that you've continuously improved. So I've kind of pitched you on what ISO 27001 is. I know that was really fast and I covered a lot of ground. And I hope it gives you a flavor for it. If you choose to go down this road towards ISO 27001 and you get there, what would be some of the benefits of it? In my humble opinion, I think what I like most about it is I think it simplifies security. I think security is complex. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of differences of opinion about how things should be done. To me, it's a proven recipe. Tens of thousands of organizations have validated this and are certified to this standard. Hundreds of thousands of organizations have used the controls outlined, starting with British Security Standard 7799 through now ISO 27001 and 2013. So you're talking about a recipe which is well proven. Second thing is, and this is a really significant misunderstanding about ISO 27001. ISO 27001 is a non-prescriptive standard. So ISO is focused on telling you what you need to do, but not necessarily how you need to do it. And that's an important differentiation, because I can't tell you how many times I'm on the phone with a client and they're saying, hey, this is great, we want to get ISO certified, but we're going to change our password policy this week. How many characters should our passwords be? Or how long should we keep logs? Or do we have to have two-factor authentication to be ISO 27001 certified? How long do we keep logs for? Whatever the question might be, the answer is never going to be explicitly declared in ISO 27001. And that's actually to your advantage, right? Because every organization has unique risks, unique contractual obligations, unique laws and regulations that apply to them, and their own risk appetites, right? And each person should be able to choose an appropriate risk treatment, which is the fundamental concept of ISO 27001. I'll talk about that a little bit further in the presentation as well. In effect, if you implement ISO 27001 meaningfully, you will be more secure. In advance of this presentation, I shot a note out to our ISO 27001 consultants, asking them to send me a note if any of the 100 plus ISO 27001 clients that we work with, if they're aware of any significant security events over the last 2 or 3 years with any of our clients. And I was actually amazed that there was one piece of feedback. One of our ISO 27001 clients had a situation with ransomware that they were able to recover from, fortunately, with very little effect. But I found that remarkable, right? Because if you look at the popular press, you read numbers of anywhere between 40 and 70 or 80% of companies have some types of security events. The idea that the companies that we know of that are ISO 27001 certified are having very few events, I think is a really good indicator that building a comprehensive ISMS is going to significantly reduce the chances that something goes wrong. The reason why many people come to ISO 27001 is because a partner or a customer or a strategic ally of theirs is asking them to prove they're secure because you're sharing data, or maybe you're processing data on someone else's behalf. And those organizations need to effectively manage the risk of sharing their information with you. So that's called vendor risk management. It's also called third-party risk management. And increasingly, third-party risk management is requiring more robust forms of demonstrating you're secure and compliant. This is being driven by regulations like OCC 2013-29, New York State DFS 500, I think they're calling it. But increasingly, laws and regulations are being very specific about organizations needing to have robust third-party risk management practices. And even more importantly, they're starting to have a requirement for what we refer to as fourth-party risk management, which means your third party's third party. So if right now you're being asked for proof that you're secure, if they're not already asking you, they're going to ask you for proof that your key subcontractors, third parties, vendors you use that touch the data are also secure.
John?
Yep.
Regarding third parties, we have a question about how you said it reduces the burden associated with questionnaires and on-site audits. Can you elaborate a little bit on how some of our clients have approached that, please?
Sure. So I would love to tell you that an ISO 27001 certificate is the equivalent of a magic wand, and you can make all of those audits and all those questionnaires go away. And the reality is you can't. What we hear and what we see in practice is that there is a significant reduction, but not a complete removal. So, the people that I've worked with that have kind of estimated have said like 35, 40%. Some people have said as much as 50%. And it's sometimes hard to tell because it does depend on the particular client. So I'll give you a great example. We were doing some work with an e-discovery vendor, and they were actually working with JP Morgan Chase. And JP Morgan Chase, if you don't know, has one of the world's leading vendor risk management programs. It's amazing, right? Financial services community as a whole are light years ahead of all of the rest of us. And one of the reasons that they wanted to get certified was they were hoping to reduce. JP Morgan Chase had a very robust program, so they got certified. They sent the certificate to JP Morgan Chase and were very disappointed when JP Morgan Chase scheduled an on-site audit. And I happened to be there at the time, and our client there was, oh, I thought this was going to help, and it doesn't look like it did. And they went through the audit, and at the end of the audit, the auditor said, hey, just we're not going to come back next year. You had the certificate. We just wanted to kind of touch base after seeing the certificate, make sure it actually addressed all the things that we didn't see on the certificate. But we're good. We're done now. So it will reduce things. It's not going to reduce everything. Many of our clients, and another key value, if you will, to ISO 27001 is it gets confusing when you've got multiple regulatory frameworks and you're trying to build an information security system, environment, controls, posture, whatever you want to call it. And it encompasses multiple conflicting, overlapping, ambiguous regulations, right? Especially because most regulations have the concept of applicability, right? The control only needs to be there if it's applicable, right? Well, ISO, by its definition, addresses the idea of applicability, right, through the process, right? If you talked about it's a non-prescriptive standard, we have the option of saying, this control is not relevant in my environment, and here's why, right? So all of those regulatory frameworks that have the same thing, by implementing ISO, you're already implementing the process that justifies all those exclusions. So really what happens when you build an ISO 27001 ISMS is all of those regulatory compliance requirements become an input into your ISMS, and then as the information security management system is built, it incorporates those requirements into it, and the net output, right, the net set of controls, processes, standards, technologies, everything that we're implementing will conform with each and all of those standards all at once. In fact, we can actually bake in that conformance validation into your internal audit process. So it really makes being able to demonstrate to diverse stakeholders, regulators, CXO suite, board of directors, and clients, give them evidence of your conformance with all of those different elements. By the same token, right, we can take in different regulatory compliance frameworks as inputs. If you build an ISO 27001 ISMS, you don't necessarily have to only use it to get ISO 27001 certified. So in a perfect world, you'll choose to get ISO 27001 certified, and that would be the only attestation you would ever need. But in the real world, sometimes it doesn't work out that way, and I'll give you some reasons why. One thing might be, like, so as an example, if you're like a data center services provider and you've been around a while, you've probably already been doing SOC 1s or SAS 70s. Now maybe they're SOC 2s. And those contractual obligations exist in your current contracts, and you might have vendors that haven't updated their ask to ISO 27001, but you've got new clients coming in or old clients that have updated their ask, and now they're asking for ISO 27001. So it may be advantageous in that situation to have both. And what's beautiful about ISO 27001 is it's very, very easy to encompass the requirements of SOC 2 or high trust right into your ISO 27001 ISMS. So we'll build one comprehensive set of policy standards and procedures, and you'll be able to pass both audits very, very simply. If you guys are familiar with CSA stars, we're starting to see that get a little bit more attention. That is based on the Cloud Control Matrix. It's an extended set of controls specific to cloud service providers. What's cool about ISO is, what's cool about that is that it builds on top of ISO. So in order to get to be CSA stars, you already have to have ISO 27001. High Trust is another framework that builds on top of ISO. You don't necessarily need to have an ISO certification, but you do have to have built an information security management system that conforms with ISO.
John?
Yep.
Oh, Sorry,
Yes, good.
we have a few questions asking for a comparison between an ISO 27001 certification and a SOC 2 attestation.
Cool. The easiest way for me to explain that is so SOC 2, right, is based on the trust service principles. So if you download the TSP, I think they call it 100A, right, it's the Excel spreadsheet with the 6, 7 tabs, and they've got a security, confidentiality, process integrity. So when you look at SOC 2, it's a list of controls that you're required to have. That would be most analogous in the ISO world to ISO 27002, which is a list of controls that ISO 27001 used. We'll cover this in a little bit. Or it's sort of the same thing as the Annex A controls. So it's the list of the 114 controls in Annex A, which are the same as the ones in ISO 27002, just a very shorthand version of it. So the equivalence is SOC 2 probably covers 75, 80% of those ISO 27002 controls. What the main difference between SOC 2 and ISO 27001 is that ISO 27001 includes the information security management system necessary to effectively design, implement, operate, and validate the operation of those technical controls, to rationalize it. So I would say in practice, ISO 27001 is a more robust framework. I would say that ISO 27001 is, order of magnitude, 1.4, 1.5 times as comprehensive as SOC 2. That doesn't mean that SOC 2 and a SOC 2 Type 2 service orders report is not a good and valid form of attestation. If you ask me, John, should I get a SOC 2 Type 2 or should I get an ISO 27001 certificate? My first question will always be to you, what are your customers asking for? If that's why you're doing it. Why are you doing this? And almost always it's for customer attestation or marketing. And then my next question is always, okay, what are your customers asking for? If they're asking for both, well, and you're not going to satisfy all of them either way, pick ISO 27001, it's better, right? But if I can think ISO 27001 is better, and I do, but if all your customers are asking for SOC 2, you'd be crazy to go with ISO 27001. ISO, depending upon what industry you're in, ISO could be a competitive advantage or it might be at the table stakes level now. So as an example, there are certain industries that have embraced ISO 27001. There are industries that receive and process a lot of sensitive data from their clients. Medical claims processing, e-discovery, legal firms. And in those cases, right, early adopters, I would say, had a competitive advantage. I think if you're a major law firm, as an example, at this point, if you're an AmLaw 100, you're probably at a point where ISO 27001 is table stakes, right? That's what you need to play to sit at the table, to deal with the Fortune 500 companies these days. If you guys don't know about GDPR, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you about it. It's European data protection, and it's dealing with personally identifiable information. Their definition of it is radically different than ours, and it's much more difficult and challenging to deal with. The big thing about GDPR that's got a lot of people shaking is violation of GDPR is punishable by a $20 million fine or 4% of your revenue, whichever is greater. So we've seen a lot of attention. The good news is you don't have to worry about it going into full effect until May of 2018, I believe. ISO 20, one of the requirements of it is that you build out the information. I don't remember the exact terminology they use in the standard, but information technology techniques and practices to effectively manage information security risk, including, and they give you a handful of bullets. Every attorney, including one that works for us, has kind of looked at that and said, look, if you're ISO 27001 certified, especially if you encompass another member of the ISO 27000 family, ISO 27018, the 27001 plus 27018 definitely puts you in a position where you've conformed with that requirement. If anybody's got any additional questions there, I'd be happy to set you up on a conversation with one of our consultants who's actually an attorney, because I can't talk privacy as well as I'd like to. ISO 27001 is also very valuable. I don't know if the audience is, and mostly CISOs and CTOs and CIOs, but it's very valuable to you personally, I believe. And the reason that I think it is because it positions you in a different place in your organization. First and foremost, because it's a risk management framework, and it's going to change the way you communicate with your. First of all, it's going to force communication between you, the CXO suite, the board, whoever else might be, key up in your shareholders, and it not only forces that communication, but it changes the communication. We go from needing, 300,000. I just need $300,000 this year for, the technology du jour, right? I need IAM. I need SEIM. Every year we go back to these people and we ask them for 300 grand, and we say everything's going to be good at that point. I'm not going to need anything else. And every year we come back, right? What's cool about ISO is we're not coming in and saying, give me 300K for this. We're walking in and we're saying, hey, we've got a database which has 100,000 names in it, and I know through the Ponymon Institute estimates that it's $200 notification cost per breach. So we've got a $20 million risk there. And I've been looking at alternatives to be able to effectively manage that risk. And Oracle or Microsoft or wherever has got column level database encryption capabilities that if we implemented them, that risk essentially goes to zero. And I can do that for $75,000. It's a different conversation, right? We're talking about risk. We're not talking about technology, right? Well, we're talking about the application of technology to manage risk in a context that they understand. So, the other thing I think helps a lot, and I see this a lot in many organizations, especially organizations that large private organizations, large professional services organizations, large accountancies, large law firms, right, where you've got partners or people that are running the organization that have a stake in the game. And when you walk in and you say, hey, I'm the CIO, I'm the CTO, and I think we should do X because it's going to make us more secure, and it's the sound of one hand clapping. And you may get your way, but often you're walking out without getting your way. What's really cool about ISO and how it changes that conversation is, hey, in order for us to maintain our ISO certification and keep our contracts with key client A, B, and C, it looks to me like we're going to need to be able to change this practice in this way. Changes the conversation, right? We see people being much more effective at affecting the changes necessary to improve your security posture. So based on where we've gotten to by now, right, I would think that you either know that ISO is sort of right or not right for your organization at this point. Generally speaking, the vast majority of the clients that we've helped get ISO 27001 certified they didn't wake up one morning and just decide to do it. Usually they're getting a letter from or a contractual obligation from one of their clients that says, hey, we need you to be ISO 27001 certified. And hopefully it doesn't say we need you to be ISO 27001 certified by this date or we're cutting off business, although we've had many of those as well. So ISO is best for people that need to prove they're secure and compliant. It's the best way, right, to prove you're secure and compliant if you need to prove you're secure and compliant. We mentioned the idea of fourth-party risk management. One cool thing about ISO is if you're starting to get that pressure, within ISO 27001, there's a requirement to effectively manage your third-party risk relevant to your ISO scope. So by virtue of implementing ISO, you'll take care of that requirement. Same idea with IT and business continuity. Within ISO, you inherently need to ensure the continuity of the information security management system itself. But if a key risk to your business is either IT or portions of the business not being available, then that would become part of your ISMS. So again, we can meet that requirement at the same time. And there's some value there, and anybody who's looking to do that has that particular challenge, I'd really encourage you to look at conducting your risk assessments at the same time as you're conducting your business impact assessments. In other words, with a little tweak to a risk assessment, it can be a business impact assessment, and you can actually build a business impact assessment and your risk assessment for ISO at the same time. And then, like we talked about, you're getting killed on questionnaires and audits. We're gonna, it would be a good way to help reduce that burden. Complexity, certainly something. We have had some clients come to us that have had breaches of note, and we've seen it driven, frankly, by boards as well. We had a client that had a breach, and the board mandated that you get ISO 27001 certified. It is a good thing to always look. ISO 27001 takes most organizations, minimally 6 months, maximally 18 months. Could be shorter, could be longer, but that's the general time frame. So pay attention. I would really encourage you to look at what are the asks from your customers. What's coming in the RFPs, what's coming in the RFIs, because that's going to give you an indication of where the direction is going for your organization, where the ask is going. And if it is, that would be something that you might start to think about, right? Our existing clients start to ask for that. Or if you're looking to move into a new marketplace, right? So if you're a law firm and you've been working the SMB space and you're looking to move up scale into the F500, right? You're not going to do that without that, right? So understand the needs of the market, understand what they're asking for. That might push you towards 27001 or equivalent. And certainly the global footprint thing is going to be helpful. If you have a global footprint or if your clients have a global footprint. So going back to the question that was asked a little bit earlier about SOC 2. SOC 2 is an excellent attestation. We help people get SOC 2 certified, SOC 2 attested, excuse me. We sometimes build SOC 2 and ISO 27001 environments at the same time. The concept of your clients being international, the one thing about one swing towards 27001 is that U.S. standards like high trust, which is U.S. centric, and SOC 2 are less well regarded internationally. Look, at the end of the day, is ISO right for you? It's only right for you if you can generate ROI, right? ISO is expensive. ISO is time consuming. ISO puts additional operational requirements on you as you go forward. Provides a lot of value, right? But there's a cost to it, right? And so if you're not going to be able to demonstrate a return on investment, yeah, it's really not right for you. So if you haven't run screaming out the office door and you're actually still listening, this is the overall approach to getting ISO 27001 certified. And I won't bore you with going through it because I'll walk through each step a little bit to give you a little bit of better idea what it is. So scope has been, scope is the single most important part of ISO. That's scope and risk assessment. I'll go. And so scope is what are we trying to protect and why, right? So most importantly, what is the information that we're trying to protect? So an organization does not get ISO certified typically as in toto, right? So not the whole company is ISO certified. Why? Because most organizations use it to prove they're secure to somebody, and JP Morgan Chase doesn't care if Janice and accounting's data gets disclosed. They care if their data gets disclosed, right? So generally speaking, the information that we're protecting for most organizations is very sensitive data, often data that's been entrusted to them by another entity. Once we know that data, we can begin to understand the key processes that act on that data. And what's cool about that is that as you begin to understand processes, you inherently learn about the people, the systems, the databases, the applications, the network segments, the physical facilities, the third parties, right, that actually interact with those processes, right? And each of those, to some extent, adds to the threat and risk profile associated with that information. We're going to need to understand, is that data protected by any particular laws or regulations? Is it protected by PHI laws, PII laws, state laws, banking laws, SEC, OCIE, whatever they might be, right? Organizations contractually obligate themselves to information security requirements all the time. In fact, it's amazing how often they don't realize they do. We sign contracts all the time, and it's like, really? We needed to absolutely segregate our networks to keep your data on an isolated subdomain? No, we never actually read that. So we want to know what are the client contractual obligations that you have, right, that are going to impact risk and impact our risk treatment decisions. Other external issues that might influence it, cyber insurance, evolving threats that are unique to your particular industry, a competitive landscape sometimes comes into play. Also, internal issues often influence both risk and how we're capable of managing risk or accepting risk. So as an example, the technology stack, if you're a software as a service company, LAMP might have a unique set of differences relative to a Microsoft.NET stack, right? The finances of your organization are going to influence risk treatment decisions, right? If we're working with an organization that's $1 billion organization, the idea of spending $100,000 to implement a control, hey, that's possible. In the other organization, they might agree that's a great control, but $100,000 ain't our budget. How else can we treat that particular risk, right? Politics, organizational structure, a lot of things influence our risk treatment capabilities and decisions. So once we understand the information, we understand context, the risks, things that are going to influence our ability to treat that risk, okay, we can now look at the actual risks associated with the information. First thing you need to do is understand that you've got to establish a risk methodology. What is our approach to managing risk? How do we do that? Most importantly, how do we do that repeatably and consistently? I'm an advocate of ISO 27005, but you want to use ISO 31000. I'm not going to argue with you. It's not InfoSec specific, but it's not bad. We've used New Zealand AST 4360. We've used NIST SP 800-30, Octave, OctaveS. You can use any of them. I'm not an Octave fan only because of the fact that it's asset-centric, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the most important thing, I think, in your risk assessment is understanding impact criteria. So that's the way that you measure risk, right? You might measure risk in your brain and in your organizational culture in terms of loss of clients. Government entities it's reputational oriented, right? Law firms, reputation and customer loss. Manufacturing tends to be operational efficiency, right? And it's important that you're talking in the impact terms that your management team thinks of. It's going to help you, like we talked about, talking up to the CXO suite. That's an important part of that working. It's also, if you do have an enterprise risk management function, a great thing to do at this point is to actually go to them and say, look, tell me about your impact criteria. By the way, at the same time, go to your procurement or purchasing, look at their vendor risk management program. The more you can normalize impact criteria across those 3 risk silos, better off you're going to be. I'm certainly an advocate of qualitative risk assessment versus quantitative. It makes you end up in the same or a better spot for a lot less effort, in my experience. Once we build that methodology, then we can actually conduct the risk assessment. We've already got that information, understanding how data flows, understanding the assets, the people, the processes. It becomes easy to understand the risks associated with each of those. We've identified a lot of them by going through the scoping process. Once you've assessed risk, and the process of assessing risk is saying, hey, we have risk A, here are our current risk treatments. I think we're in pretty good shape. That's an acceptable risk based on management's guidance. Okay, we don't need to do anything. Risk B, that risk isn't as good, right? We're taking client data. It's coming up on an FTP server. That FTP server is an FTP server, not an SFTP server. That data sits, that process, I figured out that data sits there for like a month at a time sometimes, even after we've processed the data. We don't have any non-repudiation mechanisms built in. Yeah, that's a risk that's not acceptable. Here are the additional treatments or controls that we're going to implement to reduce that risk. So that's the idea of a risk treatment plan. It's the current risk treatments that are good and the new risk treatments that are planned. So that way we can get to a point where we're effectively managing risk. And if you think about it, those two together equals a target state. That's where we're going, guys. Right? You put that up on the wall. Now the next thing is, right, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit. Do I want to go into this? I will. So put a pin in that, right? We get to the target state because it's important for the next slide. What's cool about ISO 27001 is this idea for each of those risks, right? ISO 27001 has a list in Annex A of 114 controls that you can use to mitigate these risks. And that's how you determine which ones you need and how strong they should be. And that's the same controls that you'll find in ISO 27002, but where in 27001 it's covered in about 12 pages. In ISO 27002, it's covered in probably 120 pages. So it really gives you the meat necessary to actually effectively understand and implement those controls. You will also implement the clauses of ISO 27001 to manage some of those risks. And that's actually, if you think about it, those are controls in themselves, right? And it's important to understand with ISO that, again, it's what, not how. So you can choose other good forms of guidance. So as an example, in ISO 27001, there's a section around system acquisition, development, and maintenance, right? Which is sort of SDLC, if anyone's from a cloud service provider or has an app dev background. It's not labeled exactly that way, but it's pretty close. And if you look through it, it's got a lot of SDLC stuff in there. There's elements in there that I look at as an ex-programmer, and I say, you know, they could improve this here, and they could improve that there. At a high level, they told me what to do, but there's not enough meat for me to do it effectively. So I often recommend to people, if you're a cloud service provider, supplement that portion of ISO with the software assurance maturity model from OWASP or BSIM, right? Same thing with the security certification accreditation sections. You know, using something out of NIST 837, not a problem. Using something out of ASVS, the Application Security Verification Standard, not a problem. In fact, I recommend it. So remember that target state I talked to here? So now that we have that target state, right, what we can do is say, all right, there's the target. What are we really doing, right? Because sometimes we're not actually achieving the target in that we're doing user account management reviews every 90 days. Okay, that manages the risk management's effective, okay. Now when we actually go down and look at it, well, yeah, user account management is taking place for some systems on 90 days, but the review is being done by information technology instead of the business unit owner, so there's really no way of knowing if that person, and what you find is that, yes, the control exists, the design of the control might be effective, but the actual operation of the control, either whether it's from a compliance perspective or from an effectiveness perspective, really isn't managing the risk now that we know exactly what the risk is that we're trying to manage. So we take that target state, we figure out what you're really doing, and we end up producing something called a gap remediation plan, which is the list of stuff that you need to get done in order to be certified. Executing the gap remediation plan is the big part of ISO 27001 for most organizations. I would say in most organizations, the vast majority of it is nothing more than thinking through developing and documenting policy standards and procedures. You know, we don't have an incident response plan. The incident response plan was one we downloaded and did a find and replace on, and it really wasn't well thought out. No, it refers to Magic Desk, and we're no longer using that, right? You know, that kind of stuff. Or, you know, data classification needs to be revisited, or user account management or system audit policy needs to kind of be revisited. So generally speaking, the vast majority of ISO 27001 remediation lies in those buckets. So I look at it as being largely OpEx. It's infrequent that organizations have a large CapEx expense for ISO 27001. Generally speaking, because if you needed something that significant, most organizations typically have it in place. Soaking the environment is the idea of letting the ISMS run for a little bit before you actually begin the audit processes. It is not required. An ISO 27001 auditor cannot give you a non-conformity for a control that was not yet supposed to fire, not yet firing. So as an example, if we stood up your ISMS on Monday and it said that you are supposed to do entitlement reviews on Wednesday, and the auditor comes in on Tuesday and says, well, I need evidence of your entitlement review, and you said, well, I don't have any evidence because we haven't had to do one yet. We need to do one tomorrow. The auditor has to say, oh, okay. Now, mind you, an auditor, if the answer to every question was we haven't had to do one yet, has some latitude in terms of requiring you to provide that evidence when it's generated, or requiring a mid-year audit or something of that nature. So I do prefer soaking the environment at least for a little bit. The other thing is that, look, we want to build the environment to be certified, but we really want to build the environment to be secure and improve our security as well. So, you know, controls built the first time are rarely perfect. and they're rarely executed perfectly by the people that are responsible for doing it. And there's certainly a learning curve in operationalizing this stuff. So giving yourself some time to get all the kinks worked out is really good. It does generate artifacts that are going to be helpful during the certification audit. Hey, let me see a copy of this. Here, no problem. And it also does allow you to demonstrate continuous improvement, which is one of the requirements of the standard. Last, you're going to want to execute your security metrics. So there is a requirement within ISO to generate security metrics, to measure metrics that demonstrate to your management that you are achieving your security objectives. So it does give you a chance to do that as well. Once we are pretty confident that we're ready to call in the auditor, that being the registrar, right, the certification auditor, you'll generally conduct your ISMS internal audit at that point. I would recommend about 6 weeks ahead of that. And what the ISMS internal audit, which is a requirement of the standard, does is it's one of the ways that top management demonstrates its commitment to ensuring the effectiveness of the ISMS. So you'll effectively conduct your own ISO 27001 certification audit. And what's cool about this particular audit, it's one of the rare catch-22s, it's the only one I know of, that works in your favor. Because if during your internal ISMS audit you identify deficiencies in your ISMS that are impacting its effectiveness, that is demonstrating that you are committed to measuring and ensuring the effectiveness of your ISMS. So finding mistakes is actually evidence that you're doing the right things. So when we do find mistakes, and you will, and you should, and that's good news, not bad news, okay? Non-conformities are opportunities for improvement. That's a positive, right? People have negative association with them. They really should. All you need to do under ISO 27001 is produce what's called a corrective action plan, which says, hey, here's what happened. Here's why we think it happened, root cause analysis. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how we're going to prevent it from happening again. And then it just needs to be approved by your ISMS committee and management. And a good ISMS internal audit, if it's done well, the likelihood of you having a non-successful certification audit is very low. The external certification audit is where the registrar comes in and conducts the certification audit with you. It's broken into 2 parts. Stage 1, often referred to as a tabletop review, is an odd audit if you've never been through it. You will sit in a conference room for somewhere between a day and 2 days full. And the auditor literally goes through the clause 4 through 10, which is, like I said, only about 10 pages, right? So you can imagine it's an hour per per page, where he's asking you to explain to him how your information security management system achieves that requirement. Best way to do that, there's certainly going to be a lot of artifacts you're going to produce. We do that through a document we often call the ISMS manual, which is really your playbook for how you plan, execute, operate, and optimize your management system. They'll go away at that point. They'll either say, hey, based on how you performed today, we're recommending you proceed to stage 2. And you should proceed to stage 2. Very rarely, if you work with a competent, someone who's been through the process before, not getting to stage 2 would be pretty unlikely. But that being said, some people don't get to stage 2. But at that point, they may still say, hey, we noticed 3 minor nonconformities, or we have 2 opportunities for improvement. They will not prevent you. Major nonconformities prevent you from going forward. Minors don't. You just have to produce a corrective action plan if they do identify any minors. And then somewhere between usually 2 weeks to 4 weeks later, they will return, come back on site, and conduct a more conventional audit, a controls audit that you're probably already familiar with, right? Show me copies of your firewall logs. They'll go to HR and ask them for copies of background checks and AUPs and security awareness training records. They're going to want to see screenshots from Active Directory to know your password policy is what it is. So that's what happens during that external certification audit. Assuming stage 2 is good, if they do cite nonconformities, again, you'll produce corrective action plans. And assuming everything's gone swimmingly to that point, you'll receive a certificate about a month later. Then you repeat. So the good news is that we celebrate. The bad news is now we got to do what we wrote down every year for the rest of our lives. It does work in 3-year cycles, so you get a certificate today, it's a 3-year certificate. Year 1, you go through what's referred to as a certification audit. In year 2 and year 3, they do a surveillance audit, which is we're just checking in to make sure you're still doing the stuff right. But it's a lighter audit. Most registrars charge about, so if the cost of the audit was 30 grand in year 1, year 2 and year 3 would probably be around, 20 grand. Roughly 0.5 to 0.7 times what the cost is would be what you do in year 2 and year 3. And then year 4, you go back to the full certification audit and then repeat forever. You will need to conduct an ISMS internal audit each year. You do need to demonstrate continuous improvement. On your internal ISMS audit, you can, if you have your own internal audit team, or if you've got someone in your team that is sufficiently independent objective of the ISMS, in other words, they haven't been part of building or operating the ISMS, they can assess the ISMS assuming that they have an appropriate competence and an appropriate independence and objectivity. If not, most organizations, I'd say 75% of organizations, engage a third party, somebody like Pivot Point, to conduct their ISMS internal audit each year. And if you're going to implement an ISO 27001 ISMS, one strong recommendation is don't let anybody who's not integral to your ISMS build too much of it, blindly from you, right? Because if you think about it, you're building a plan that you're going to follow forever. And much like if you were overweight and not as healthy as you wanted to be, and you went to a personal diet and exercise guru and you said, give me a plan, but I'm too busy to participate, and then you got it back and it's kale salads every day and it's tennis every night, and you've got a torn rotator cuff, and kale gives you the hives, you're not going to be happy with the output. You're not going to be capable of living in that environment. So the more your ISMS reflects your corporate culture, your organizational DNA, and the way you actually do things, the more comfortable it's going to be to live in and the more effective it's going to be. So please, please, please make sure you're integral to all the key decisions made in building your ISMS, whether you're working with a third party or not, to do it. So what does it actually take? In our experience, we've been doing this. I've been an ISO 27001 certified lead auditor since 2006, 2007, something like that. And we've been helping organizations since roughly that time. Right about now, I'd say an average is, 5 months is incredibly fast. I don't recommend it. It's painful, very disruptive to business as usual. You will make decisions concurrently that should be made serially, that have to be reversed, but sometimes it's a necessary evil. It's going to be much more expensive than it should be. But occasionally you have to do it that fast, or you lose a client or something like that. 15 months would be on the slower end of the scale, although we have some clients that take years just because they're busy, they're moving, they're growing. It becomes a non-priority for a period of time. I would say the bulk of the clients that we work with that have a need to get certified generally get certified in about a 9, 10, let's say 10 to 12 month period. It varies a little bit based on, ISO is always important to companies, but it might not be urgent. And in some organizations, urgent trumps important. And the same people that are responsible for helping with the ISMS are, traveling around the world doing other stuff, and it's going to make it not possible to move at a fast pace. It is a lot of work. I don't want to downplay that. You can do it completely internal. You just need enough time, enough bandwidth, and enough expertise. I would say many companies, I don't know if it's many or most, engage third-party consultants to reduce that time frame, to ensure you don't make any wrong turns, and more because they don't have the expertise and they don't have the time. So the people that are necessary to the effort, even if they have the expertise, those people have full-time jobs, or often more than full-time jobs already, and layering on ISO on top of that is just backbreaking. It can be expensive, ISO. The certification audit, if you were, just giving you an example, let's say you're a cloud service provider, an e-discovery, or a company that does marketing analytics. You've got headquarters in Massachusetts, and you've got a data center that's co-located with Azure or AWS or DataPipe or something like that. Something like that is, the certification audit costs you're going to get quoted are somewhere between probably 15 and 30. That shouldn't be the case. There's guidance within the ISO family, ISO 27006, 7, 8. give guidance to auditors on scoping and how to conduct audits. You would think they'd all give you the same quote, but they don't. So you're going to get a certificate from any of them. It might be a bumpier ride with some other than others, and the level of assurance you're truly receiving will be lower at the lower price. But you're going to get by with any of them probably, as long as they are certified, right? But as long as they are ANAB or UCAS accredited, right? If you're going to use consultants, you could use an independent guy that's, you find a guy on the street that's charging $75 an hour working out of his garage. That's one thing. You can work with, high-level consulting firms like, KPMG and EY, and you can work with mid-tier, boutique firms like Pivot Point or Securastar and people like that, right? You're going to see a wide range of where you might be. I would say that in most of the time, you're probably going to fall into, if you're using someone who's reasonably competent, 30 would be at the absolute low end of what you might do, and you're going to be doing a lot of the work there. 90 is sort of towards the high end. Of course, this is going to be different for, if Johnson & Johnson wants to deploy ISO 27001 across all of its pharmaceutical manufacturing plants, that number is going to be a lot different. Or if you're a law firm, that's going to be to get, HQ, main data center certified. If you've got, 20 international offices, yeah, that price goes up because you've got to conduct, risk assessments and internal audits, and the auditors need to visit those remote offices if they're going to be listed on the certificate. So I'm talking about here a framework of a typical client that we see. Happy to give people more specific guidance if they have questions there. And then the other thing which varies a lot is it varies how much work you do, right? So if we give you the gap remediation plan, and our process works where we execute something called phase one, which gets you through scoping, risk assessment, and gap assessment. And we deliver a gap remediation plan, which, if you remember, is a prioritized list of things you should do, you need to get done. And then we say, which ones are you going to do and which ones do you want us to do? Some of our clients say, hey, I think we can do almost the whole list, and their costs are on the low end of the scale. Some of our clients say, man, I don't have any idea, I'd like you to do all of it, right? And those clients are going to cost more. So that's where that incredibly wide range, and trust me, I know, there is a rationale to it. Happy to explain it further if you have questions. So, how did I do with time, Carla?
Your usual. You're a little bit over.
Shit. Excuse me. Excuse my French. I said shoot. I swear.
Yeah, and we do have a lot of questions.
Okay. Listen, I'm happy to stay on. I apologize that I get on my soapbox and I get excited. So I apologize to anybody who can't stay on. Feel free to shoot me an email. You'll see me on LinkedIn. It's john.very@pivotpointsecurity.com if you need to leave and I don't get your question. Or put your email in, your question, and I'll send it to you. I apologize for being a little late on people, and I'm happy. Carl, I'm going to hang as long as people are on answering questions.
Okay, good. So we'll get started. Do you need a 3-second break, or are you ready to dive right in?
Ready to go. It's the lightning round.
Okay. All right, we have some toughies. Here's your chance to show your brilliance. Can you talk a little bit about how ISO 27001 certification differs from ISO 27002 compliance?
Pass. Next question. Oh, no, okay. So remember what we talked about earlier. So ISO 27002 compliance means that you've implemented controls that it's ISO 27002 compliance is a really odd term, because if you pick up a copy of ISO 27002, it says passwords might have the following characteristics. So how do I tell you whether or not you comply with ISO or conform with ISO 27002, right? You can tell me you have a 4-character password and 8-character password. If I tell you you don't conform, what's my rationalization? So what happens is when most people say ISO 27002 conformance, what they mean is using ISO 27002 and prevailing good practice. So as an example, in that particular case, if you had 4-character passwords, we'd probably say, well, you should probably have 8-character passwords. Now, that might be wrong, right? Because you really only need 4-character passwords because you're only a widget manufacturer and you make number 8 screws, and that's the only thing that your passwords protect. You don't really need strong passwords. So 27002 conformance is, I look at those 27002 controls, I verify you have them all, and I take a best guess as to what would be an appropriate level to have them to. ISO 27001 certification is A, different, you've built the ISMS, and then B, all of the controls in ISO 27002, which are in a document called SOA, a Statement of Applicability in ISO 27001, I know which ones you need and which ones you don't. So I'm not telling you that you need these 114 controls because you don't. You only need 100, and you proved that to me. And then I'm not telling you that you need to keep logs for 6 years because that is good practice. You've shown me through your risk assessment that there's no reason for you to keep logs more than 30 days. So I'm able to give you a contextualized verification that the security controls you've chosen to implement are reasonable and appropriate.
Okay. The next question we have is, does the firm that performs the internal audit have to be separate than the firm that completes the external audit? Is it possible to do an assessment with a firm that will later do the external audit?
No. So in ISO, there's a requirement of the standard that the registrar can't consult with you, right? And Pivot Point is a consulting firm. So we're not a registrar, so we can't actually conduct a certification audit. So we always live on the consulting side, registrars always live on the audit side. So it's okay if you're consulting. So if you worked with someone like Pivot Point as a consultant to implement your ISMS, we can conduct the internal audit assuming that the person on our team who conducts the internal ISMS audit is independent objective of the team that actually built the ISMS. Sometimes registrars do something called a readiness assessment, which seems like a gap assessment, but it's not. Really, their only capability is saying you are ready or not ready based on do you have this list of 14 or 18 artifacts. They can't give you guidance as to, well, no, I don't have a statement of applicability. Okay, do you have a template? What does that look like? How do I fill it in? They're not allowed to provide that level of guidance, or they can't certify it.
Thank you, sir. Next question is, can you compare how NIST requirements compare to 27001?
Great question. NIST is great. NIST FISMA guidance is great. We do a lot of work in the government sector, and I've done a lot of 837, NIST 853, FedRAMP work. NIST is a great standard. The big difference between NIST and ISO is in both instances that they label the controls differently, but you can map any NIST control to an ISO control and vice versa. In fact, since, I don't know, Rev 3, they actually cross-reference those controls. In fact, NIST has said that they're going to cross-reference all of their documentation to ISO, and anything that's new is already cross-referenced. So that idea of how do they compare, is already baked in. The second part of it, which is the biggest difference between NIST FISMA, specifically NIST 853 Rev 4 and ISO 27001/2, is in the NIST world, the risk assessment process only establishes 3 risk levels and then provides prescriptive guidance as to which controls are necessary and what level of implementation are necessary. So where ISO gives you infinite flexibility as to what you're going to choose to do, NIST has very specific requirements. Most people find NIST FISMA guidance to be a little bit over the top and limiting. I have had some clients that like the idea that I don't got to figure out what I need to do. I didn't want to implement two-factor auth, but it says I should. At least I have some guides. I don't got to figure it out myself. So I see people go both ways, but I think most people, if they don't need to go NIST FISMA, tend to stay away from it because it gives them greater flexibility.
Thank you. Next question is, from a cost perspective, how does ISO 27001 certification compare with SOC 2 attestation?
SOC 2 will definitely be less expensive than ISO. The actual certification audit will be fairly similar. So the cost for the CPA firm or registrar, so registrars do ISO audits, CPA firms do SOC 2 attestations. That cost is pretty typical. I mean, we've had clients that have gotten $28,000 proposals for both ISO and SOC 2, confidentiality and security and confidentiality principles. So that cost will be about the same. The cost to get prepared is probably 40-50% more for ISO. And then you will save money in year 2 and year 3 on ISO versus SOC on the certification audit, because if you remember right, ISO would go 30-20-20, where SOC would stay 30-30-30.
Thank you. Okay, this one's a toughie. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. If ISO 27001 certification is not a need right now, but we have adopted this as our risk management framework, how do we socialize or communicate it with senior leadership and audit against it? Can you offer any advice there?
Oh boy.
I told you it was a good one.
Yeah. So the question I would have back, and I'd love to have a conversation with whoever this person is. What I don't get a sense of there is this an InfoSec guy or an IT guy that's trying to do the right thing, and he's trying to promulgate this, and he doesn't yet have management support, versus he's got management's commitment? Because at the end of the day, all control environments, I don't care if it's a financial control environment, quality control environment, business, anytime you have a control environment, it's tone at the top. So I do see other people trying to implement ISO 27001 in their environment, but if the CEO or COO isn't going to stand behind you, I got to be honest with you, you're fighting a tough battle.
Okay, so let's see what the next one is here. Okay. Can you speak at all towards cloud security for software as a service and how ISO 27001 is helpful there?
Sure. I think the way it's helpful there is in the same way it's helpful for most organizations, in that most cloud services process third-party data, and the third-party risk management, vendor risk management program says, hey, you're touching our data, you need to prove you're secure, and one of the preferred methods is probably ISO 27001. So I think that's the first part of it, right? I think where ISO 27001 has some advantages over, let's say as an example, SOC 2 as an attestation for cloud services, is that you have a more robust, if you will, set of controls that deal with the development lifecycle. And ISO by its nature, so that's the second thing, right? So inherently within ISO, you've got a better consideration of the risk associated with cloud services. And then the third thing is that where SOC 2 is more prescriptive and is less embracing or less built to take in other guidance, ISO 27001 is built to take that in. And to me, if you are a cloud service provider and you are not aligning yourself, if you're not looking at OWASP guidance and the like, you're putting yourself in a tough spot. I'm a huge fan of the software assurance maturity methodology. Not that we followed exactly, but certainly it helps us architect SDLCs that have the right security touch points, milestones, certification accreditation activities, especially if you overlay that with the application security verification standard. If you haven't looked at the new one from OWASP, it's amazing. And their idea of certifying applications to level 1, 2, and 3, we think is really sharp, and it's something we're building our programs around.
Okay, thank you. Only a couple more. You're doing great. Is there any information as to how companies have gained revenue with the institution of ISO 27001?
I wish I had that information because it would help us too. Very selfish, I wish I had that information. It's funny because, I could certainly point you to, a handful of our earliest customers in ISO 27001 that were, 20-person shops that are now 250-person shops. I think that the vast majority of the customers that I know personally of our customer base that have gotten ISO certified have all enjoyed significant growth that I would say outpaced their peers, but I don't have a study to point to. ISO 27001 statistics are not easy to come upon.
Okay, thank you. And last question that we have, do you have any readings or resources that you would recommend for people that have never been through the ISO 27001 implementation process before?
Um, there's great there's some great sites on the internet that I think are the best. I mean, we get kudos for our site. You got information governance out of the UK. Dejan Kustik does some good stuff. I forget if his adversary or something like that. He's got some good stuff out there. If you're serious about so if the goal is that you want to roll your own, great. I'm an advocate and support anybody who wants to do something themselves. What I would suggest is go look at taking either a fundamentals course, I think they call it, but even better is looking at getting an ISO 27001 lead implementer certification. It'll take you, 4 or 5 days worth of study. You got to pass a test. You end up with a certificate, which benefits your career, and it's going to give you the best foundation for getting a sense of how is this going to actually happen and what do I actually need to do. One you can look at pecb.org. They've got some good, reasonably priced classes that we use to get our guys certified.
Okay, and I lied. We have one more question. Sorry.
That's okay.
Is third-party review or penetration testing required or just recommended?
So that's a great question. And if you remember, my answer about ISO for everything is the answer is always to any question, is it required? Do I need to do it? Is always ISO says, implement controls in accordance with your particular risk. So if you can demonstrate that you are managing the risk associated with, let's say an external user penetrating your network and gaining access to data in a way that doesn't require penetration testing, then ISO does not say that you need it. Now, this is where things cross over, and your customers might say you need it, or you might think it's good marketing to add to your ISO certificate. So ISO won't tell you need it or don't need it. If you can prove you're managing the risk, we're okay. But generally speaking, if you're a cloud service provider, if you're a law firm, and if you're a firm that's got an external footprint that's got something to do with your client data, the vast majority of people are doing some form of penetration testing to support it. So
Thank you.
it's optional, but more likely than not, you're going to probably end up going there.
Okay. I think that was our last question.
Awesome.
So thank you everyone for attending. We hope that you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email. John, thank you for presenting. As always, very much appreciated.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Everyone have a good day.
Thank you.